Well, thank you very much, and it really is a great honour to be invited here today. I have to say that when I was invited and then when I read the course outline, not only did I want to come along and give this talk, I actually wanted to enrol in the course. All over the world, people are talking about the issues that you're talking about here today in this summer school. All over the world, people are losing confidence in the ability of their current political systems to address the issues they're finding most concerning. We're asking ourselves, is it the way our political and governance systems are structured? Is it the quality of the people we elect? Or is it our fault for not being more actively involved? I think it's fair to say that it's a combination of all of those things. But however we perceive the problem, the most pressing dilemma is that we're not really clearly seeing the solution. We're all looking to our leaders here in Australia and internationally and desperately hoping that they will deliver a clear, coherent and just vision and shared story of what our future might look like. We're hoping that they'll instill confidence in us, that they will have the will and capacity to implement the changes required. As I turn this around in my mind, I come to the same question as the organisers of this summer school. I may not know the solution, but I think we might be on the right track if we interrogate the nexus between politics, community and the common good, the theme of your summer school. Maybe if we can focus on what we agree serves the common good, we can then more clearly see what parts of our political and governance systems don't contribute to this outcome, so that we can adapt and restructure these systems so that they do. That's exactly what we've tried to do at the City of Sydney, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. Our efforts to work with the community on agreeing what constitutes the common good, so that reveals to us what needs to change in the way our governance systems are structured and what we do to advocate for change. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners, in particular the main Indigenous group, the Dharawal Nation, on whose land we meet. I would like to pay my respects to their ancestors, past and present. At the City of Sydney, we pay strict observance to that protocol. We do this because we recognise that it is an essential part of healing the relationship with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We do so because it's good manners. It shows respect. And respect is an essential ingredient in building relationships, trust, and the social capital we need to become a resilient and sustainable community. We do so because if we are serious about true and active community participation in the articulation of the common good, then we have to enfranchise and truly listen to all our communities and find appropriate ways to bring everyone to the table. And finally, we do so because it causes us to stop and think. Embedded in these words is an important reminder. The dissemination, humiliation and impoverishment of an entire population was the result of a way of thinking about identity, land and resources that has led us to the position we find ourselves in today. The paradigm that has caused our past is arguably the same paradigm that is shaping our future. The ways we ultimately structure our economies is a result of the ways we ultimately structure our lives. The more our identities are defined by what we own and consume and the methods by which we control land and resources, the less likely we are to become the people who can create a sustainable future. The old thinking is not going to get us there. Or as Einstein said, we can't solve problems using the same thinking we used when we created them. So the first challenge is to ask ourselves, are we bringing the right thinking to this question? Are we putting the right frameworks around our efforts? And if not, what might those frameworks look like? Again, it's not possible to properly consider all the aspects of our Australian profile that should be considered when we address the question of community building and empowerment. But there are a few important and alarming indicators other than the treatment of our Indigenous population that, unless addressed, will stand in the way of success. Australia is a very rich country. However, we are now the country with the highest per capita carbon footprint, and we rank about third in the world in water usage. We are amongst the countries with the greatest disparity between rich and poor. We are amongst the countries with the highest levels of preventative disease such as obesity, diabetes and heart disease, as well as high levels of mental illness, and we have very high levels of incarceration. So not only is the old thinking not going to get us there, arguably the old thinking is clearly undoing us, but have we got it in us to change? When I reflect on these indicators and ask myself what might be a useful starting point, I keep coming back to a phrase coined by Bliss Brown of Imagine Chicago: an economy where no one and nothing is wasted. An economy where every single person is enfranchised and has a place, where every resource is used and reused. And the only way I can imagine us creating an economy where no one and nothing is wasted is to reinvigorate the role of government and the public sector as the servants of the public good. Now, we should all be shocked that I would suggest that governments and the public sector are not the servants of the common good. But we're not shocked, are we? Because in recent years, we've come to see how years of legislative and regulatory changes have contributed to government and the public sector receding from this role. The recent global financial crisis was a huge wake-up call. The failure of central governments to reach agreement in Copenhagen is another. The problem is that as each small incremental change is introduced, it's very difficult for most people to understand how and why it will impact. The media is generally not very supportive and helpful, and we don't have a great tradition of supporting our public intellectuals, which is why, I will say it again, it is so important that summer schools like this are conducted. So understanding that there is a great need for more informed citizen engagement, the question is, how do we do this? And what might local government contribute? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at the City of Sydney to address this, how we're trying to involve people in creating the story of our shared future. At the City of Sydney, we have an overarching story developed with the community that defines and guides how we believe the common good can be served. It is called Sustainable Sydney 2030. We have a logo, and it's on the screen behind me. The logo is a series of intertwined circles. It represents an understanding that in order to achieve our aims, we must bring the threads of the economic, environmental, social, and cultural together. It represents that the process of change will be an iterative one. That is, if we don't change the way we think, we won't change the way we do things. And if we don't change the way we do things, we won't change our impact on the environment. And if we don't change our impact on the environment, we won't have a sustainable future, and so the circle goes round and round. And of course, our logo represents the world we all share and reminds us that actions cannot simply displace problems. Our sustainability cannot be at the expense of others, because if it is, we will have failed, and we certainly would not be creating an economy where no one and nothing is wasted. So now I'm going to reflect on some of the things we're doing at the City of Sydney and try to tie them back to the question of today's seminar. Can defining the common good through explicit, active community involvement help us to understand what needs to change in our governance processes? As I said earlier, we started with respect and a belief that all people and communities are entitled to and should be encouraged to participate. One of the first projects of the new administration at the City of Sydney was to develop a comprehensive Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander protocol in consultation with the community. This protocol recommended, amongst other things, that an acknowledgement of country should precede every council meeting and the opening of all events such as New Year's Eve and Sydney Festival. At the City of Sydney, those relationships have led to the signing of principles of cooperation with the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, many new community programs and increased funding for services, an Aboriginal employment strategy, and an Aboriginal advisory panel. The fact that this was one of the very first things we did sent an important message, but respect must quickly be followed by getting runs on the board. We quickly turned our words into action. At Redfern, in the face of great scepticism, and just months after the Redfern riots, we opened a community centre adjacent to the area known as the Block. This is a project that is very close to my heart because it proves that if you truly involve people, if you truly work in partnership with the community will care for and contribute to community well-being and assets. When we were building the Redfern Community Centre, people told us that the large glass front panels would be destroyed, that we needed to put a high fence around the facility to stop theft and vandalism, that the programs would fail and no one would come. The police actually called me into their office and told me this, amongst other groups. We disagreed. We worked with the community for 18 months leading up to the opening of this facility. We held numerous barbecues to talk about what we might do at the centre when it opened. We ran tours of the building site. We engaged Aboriginal security to look after the site. Every day that I could, I walked down to the site to meet people or just to be seen there, demonstrating to the community that we were serious about working from within the community and improving the delivery of services to this community. What we said was, we will keep the glass. There will be no fence. And this community centre will succeed because this community centre belongs to this community and we believe in the community. And it has succeeded, with over 40,000 people a year visiting to attend activities and events, 2 successful employment services, including a casting agency for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander talent, many after-school and youth activities running things such as homework programs and sporting competitions, and many, many more Aboriginal staff. And then, a couple of years later, as part of the upgrade of Redfern Street, Park and Oval, we commissioned a major piece of public art by acclaimed Aboriginal artist Fiona Foley. The reason I mention this particular project is because it truly demonstrates the way the Council expresses its commitment and values through action. The project was the first large public art commission made by the new Council, and it was for a park in Redfern, not the CBD. And it was an Aboriginal artist, and it was created in consultation with the community, and it's for a work that is used for children's play. In terms of expressing our values, this project ticks all the boxes. However, having delivered enough runs on the board in this and many other communities to gain the community's confidence, we knew that if we were serious about community empowerment and engagement, we needed to move past simply being good at delivery. We needed to develop processes that truly involved our communities, processes that enabled people to be active participants. So we undertook our first comprehensive community planning process, the development of local action plans. We divided our city into 9 areas and commenced local action planning. We asked, tell us about your place. What is important about it? What don't you like? What can we do? What can you do? And most importantly, what can we do together? 12 months of consultation culminated in the adoption of 9 community action plans containing character statements, community aspirations, and over 900 actions requested by our community. The action plans guide what we do, but what they really do is represent a huge effort to engage people in telling the story of their place, in creating commitment to place, building social connection and cohesion, meaning, purpose, and belonging. And now, 3 years later, we've completed about 90% of the actions, and we report back against progress with these actions at every meeting we hold in these areas. These projects range from planting trees and putting in new park benches to major new parks and street upgrades and community facilities, such as the Water Police site. Council acquired the Water Police site in 2005, saving this precious foreshore land from development and returning it to the people. We've completed a new park in Surrey Hills. We've completed stage 2 of the Glebe Foreshore Walk. Main streets, the hubs of our local village economies, are largely in decline, and yet to establish their future identity, we're working towards reinvigorating these streets. We've upgraded Darlinghurst Road, Oxford Street, Redfern Street, Glebe Point Road, and Harris Street. We've created business support grants to assist business associations to address marketing and other activities to support local economies. We have formed Main Street support teams to address the full range of issues affecting these streets, everything from preserving local character to safety and security. And another project in our local action plans was our beautiful new Surrey Hills Community Centre, with a state-of-the-art library, childcare and community rooms for classes, and a full commercial kitchen, which was one of the requests of our multicultural groups. All of these examples demonstrate a respect of community knowledge and aspiration. They commence with broad-ranging consultation aimed at canvassing the broadest possible views, and they actively involve local communities. All of these projects, whether they provide infrastructure and the other activities like community events and services, all enhance public life. They all provide opportunities for the community to live, learn, share, and contribute. They all serve the common good. The City of Sydney has consistently been working from the bottom up, listening to communities, building capacity, building relationships, growing social capital. And all because we know that we have to create strong, resilient, flexible and engaged communities with the ability to set future direction, contribute to and withstand change. Which leads me to the discussion about future challenges. All of the things I've described are essential to the future well-being of our city. All of these actions tell part of the story of our city, but we all know that we face a greater and increasingly more urgent task. There is a greater story that is yet to be fully told. This story is one where we create a sustainable and prosperous future for our city, for the people who live and work here, and for the millions of Australians who rely on the city's economy. In 2007, the City of Sydney announced that we would commence a Sydney 2030 project. This plan addresses the relationship between the form of the city and its future sustainability. Australia's future prosperity depends on its capital cities. In 2006, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth were the locations of 61% of Australia's economic activity. Metropolitan Sydney represents around 25% of Australia's GDP. The City of Sydney, a small local government area, just 26 square kilometres, contributes about 8% of Australia's GDP. Over the next 25 years, we expect to increase our population by 110,000 to 270,000 and jobs to 425,000. Even though our city residents shudder when they hear these forecasts, our city will still not have densities as great as many cities around the world. Nevertheless, growth needs to be managed. Growth alone does not achieve prosperity. The impacts of growth need to be considered if the city is going to be sustainable. It doesn't matter how many jobs you have if you can't get to them. It doesn't matter how many jobs you have if the people you need to fill them can't afford to live near those jobs. And it doesn't matter how many jobs you have if there just aren't the right people to fill them. And it doesn't matter how many jobs you have the capacity to accommodate if city amenities such as air quality, public domain, open space, safety, cultural life, and social cohesion are not conducive to business choosing to locate those jobs here in the first place. So at the City of Sydney, we think the main challenges for our city are how to sustain and enhance our economic performance and contribution, accommodating growth whilst reducing environmental impacts, the provision of quality, affordable housing, creating city amenity that ensures people will want to live and work here and that businesses will want to locate here. The reality is that to be sustainable, we have to accommodate more people in our urban areas so that we can get better value out of existing infrastructure and preserve precious food-growing land. Our front-of-mind task is to articulate or tell the story of a city that integrates the relationship between economic, environmental, cultural, and social sustainability, a story where we can all benefit from this change. We believed that a well-developed plan with overwhelming public support could steer Sydney's future, even in areas outside our direct control. From the beginning, public consultation and support was integral. Building partnerships with the community, business, and other levels of government was essential to our success. We spent more than a year on the most comprehensive consultation we had ever undertaken in our city. Over 300,000 people participated, with 12,000 directly consulted at more than 30 community forums held over 18 months. We have a diverse population, with Australia's largest gay and lesbian community, a significant Indigenous community, and more than 200 nationalities. We have the wealthy and marginalised living side by side. Our consultation needed to cater for this diversity and capture the views of nearly 1 million visitors and workers who are in our city each day. In order to reach all of these groups, we provided a wide range of ways for people to participate, such as street surveys, website feedback, community workshops, interactive displays at markets. We engaged with people by their local neighbourhood or by their topic of interest, by their professional expertise and their capacity to influence others. And I'll just give you a bit of a snapshot. Almost 1,500 people attended 19 forums in 9 precincts. 350 business leaders attended 5 forums. 100 local business owners attended 2 events, and there was a forum for 120 young professionals. The Lord Mayor hosted 10 roundtable events on aspects of our plan for the Chinese community, for cultural leaders, for social and education, economic, and the built environment and design decision makers. Hundreds of school children participated in art projects and poem competitions. 120 government representatives were briefed before the public release. 4,000 people attended public lectures such as the one that the Lord Mayor is presenting at there in that slide. 1,000 or more people attended forums to talk about and help us to draft priorities and prioritise the priorities. We incorporated consultation into all our community events and festivals with displays, talks, and we created this future phone, which was a phone booth that you could go into and you could leave your message about what you wanted us to do in terms of improving and developing the city. We launched the draft plan with a public exhibition, media exposure, followed by more briefings to get feedback, and then the plan was formally adopted. Through this process, a clear consensus emerged for making Sydney green, global, and connected. We made sustainability the overarching theme, embracing an integrated approach to environmental, economic, social, and cultural sustainability. Sustainable Sydney 2030 sets targets and actions to achieve this against all aspects of sustainability. Importantly, 97% of people said they wanted us to address global warming, and the plan responds with actions on the 3 big levers of building emissions, transport, and energy. So one major objective is to position Sydney as a leading green city in the transition to a new carbon economy. After Sustainable Sydney 2030 was formally adopted, the Lord Mayor went to a city government election and was re-elected with an increased majority and a clear mandate to implement our plan. And so we got started. It was very clear that the most urgent issue was climate change. And as a result, the most significant implementation plans were the ones that related to the reduction of emissions. And that's when we really started to see what was wrong with the governance structures, which brings me to the last part of my talk. How the process of defining the common good with our community has led us to understand the deficiencies of our current political and governance systems. Even though our plans had been developed with and endorsed by our community, and they aligned with national and state objectives and targets, when we commenced implementing our plans, we met with everything from incomprehension, disinterest, and obstruction at every turn. The levels of government above us were unwilling or unable to support our action. Whether it was the introduction of cycleways, models for inner-city affordable housing, or the provision of decentralised and renewable energy, every single substantial action in Sustainable Sydney 2030 requires understanding and partnership of the other levels of government that they are clearly unable to deliver. As we proceeded, we discovered that this was not an uncommon experience. We participate in a council made up of other capital and major cities here in Australia, including Wollongong, and we are members of the C40, a partnership of about 100 cities around the world. We have all undertaken similar projects. That is, we have all developed plans to achieve a sustainable future for our communities, plans that address how we might achieve economic and social sustainability whilst reducing emissions, mitigating against climate change, and securing energy and water supply. And there should be no surprise that we have done this, because we all know that the majority of people live in urban settlements or cities. In Australia, it's well over 60%. And not only are urban settlements high emitters of greenhouse gases, but the greatest impacts will be felt where the greatest number of people live. So cities and communities need to be part of the solution, and it should therefore go without saying that local government, the level that should be the direct representation of the local citizenry, should play a significant role. But that's not the only reason. One of the significant ways we're going to reduce emissions and save water is to change our behaviour and to change the way we build, live in, and provide energy and water to people. And much of that needs to be negotiated at a local level with local communities. The relationship between planning, the delivery of infrastructure, and the communities that live in urban settlements is largely managed by local government. That's why Sydney and Melbourne joined cities from all over the world in Copenhagen last December. The major focus of the cities and the ICLEI contingent in Copenhagen was to try and get a line into the international agreement that committed central governments to engagement with local governments on this issue. Our message is getting through. At the Cities Conference at Copenhagen, the head of the OECD released a new report on cities, climate change, and multi-level governance. And the head of the World Bank also spoke about the need for central and regional government to enable, support, and empower local communities through local government. I'm labouring this point because what we're all concluding is that to achieve the required action, there needs to be a paradigm shift in the way policy is being developed. And that won't happen unless central governments start listening to and engaging with the local. Old policy needs to be put through the appropriate prism. The way a policy is implemented is impacted by the local conditions of the place it is being applied to. Factors such as the cost of land, complementary infrastructure, community capacity, all influence policy outcomes. Local factors need to be understood, local partnerships need to be formed if policy is to succeed. It cannot be a one-size-fits-all. We can't solve problems using the same thinking we used when we created them. So to summarise, at the City of Sydney, the principles underpinning our work are: 1, a commitment to local government that defines the common good with the community and commits to delivering those outcomes. 2, a belief that this process will help us to understand the deficiencies of our current systems so that we can advocate and contribute to change. 3, a recognition that centralised systems of government are unable to meet current challenges because they are unable to address the particularities of place. 4, a recognition that aspects of government and the institutions that we rely on have lost the ability to act in the public interest, and citizens must act to redress this. And finally, a recognition that citizens can't contribute if they don't have access to information to inform their action, and that local government can play a role in providing that information. I'd like to conclude now by just saying a few words about leadership style. I come from a background in the arts. I trained in the theatre, and I ran a small business running a theatre company and events company for about 10 years prior to joining local government. And as you heard, I did my master's degree here at Wollongong University. People often ask me, how did you make the transition? What on earth has being as a theatre director got to do with being a local government bureaucrat? Personally, I think it's a great prerequisite for a career in city planning. If you break it right down, theatre is just people moving through space, interacting with each other and their environment. And that's how the meaning is made. Just like city planning, people moving through space, interacting with each other and their environment. The art of theatre is the meaning or story that is made as a consequence of this movement and interaction. The art of city planning is the quality of life we experience as a consequence of this movement and interaction. Over the years working in theatre, I learnt that it didn't matter how good the words were or how stunning the sets or soundtrack. The meaning was not conveyed, the story not transferred, unless each and every member of the storytelling team, the director, the actors, the designers, the composers, had a deep understanding of the story being told and their role in it. Hundreds of hours go into the telling and retelling until the company is ready to tell the story. And in time and with practice, the story starts to tell itself. As a leader in local government, just like when I was a theatre director, I have to have a pretty good understanding of what the story might be. But I know the story cannot be told and the meaning cannot be conveyed until everyone in the team has come to their own understanding. The challenges facing our city require engagement and participation of all our community, and this will only happen if the community has helped to create the story and their role in it. So the leadership style at the City of Sydney is to lead from within, to work from the bottom up, to value every contribution, because the kind of city we want is one where all people can see themselves having a future, a sustainable city, a city where no one and nothing is wasted. Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and like Monica, it is a delight to be here. And I also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I'm going to take a slightly different tack than Monica. I'm going to talk about a specific project, I guess you would call it, that we worked on in Mildura for about 5 years. And we thought it was something that we needed to do because the face of local government is changing as we move forward. And I agree wholeheartedly with what Monica said. What we did yesterday is no longer relevant tomorrow. So we need to think about how we move forward as a collective sector and how we as individual organisations best meet the needs of our communities. Traditionally, we've looked at addressing problems as they arise, Generally speaking, the service system itself has thrown money at them to try and overcome the problem. Quite often, as a result of that, they're treating the symptom and really not understanding the underlying cause. What we did in Mildura was recognise that that's no longer the way to go. We need to be more strategic in our focus. The federal and state governments expect us to be strategic in our focus, and if we're not, then I think you'll find that our funding lines will dry up, I should say, until such time as we can become more strategic. And I think across the sectors, the local government sector, you're starting to see some of that now. We were talking over lunch about where local government is going and the need for local governments to be more proactive, more strategic in their planning and more regional in their focus. And so that means that we need to work better together as a collective group, but also looking at the longer term and how we bring all of that into our planning. That doesn't matter whether it's infrastructure or building communities, and building infrastructure is a subcomponent of that. We were very fortunate. You right? Okay. Just to put a little bit of context around Mildura, the northwest portion of Victoria, about 10% of the geographic land mass of Victoria, 24,000 square kilometres, about 54,000 people, and spread over 14 communities, of which Mildura was the largest, with about 30,000 of those people. In close proximity to Mildura, there are two other communities which comprise about another 10,000, and then outside of that, there are another 12 communities to make up the total population. And part of the challenge of moving forward was understanding each of those communities and the needs of those specific communities. And I had communities isolated where I actually had to drive into South Australia, drive up South Australian roads and then come back into my communities to get to meet with them. So there are some challenges there in just understanding, and not only understanding but taking that strategic approach moving forward. We were very fortunate that one of our councillors had a very strong relationship with Professor Tony Vinson. Tony's a well-known social researcher. You may well know him better than I, as he headed up, I understand, the New South Wales Corrective Services for a number of years. He also produced two reports, one in 1999, which was Unequal in Life, and a follow-up to that called Dropping Off the Edge in 2004, and they were produced for the Jesuit Society. And they looked at social disadvantage across the postcodes in the states of New South Wales and Victoria. And when we had a look at those reports, we had a disproportionate number of our communities at the lower end of those social disadvantage spectrum. And so therefore, with one of our councils having this relationship with Tony, we were able to invite Tony down to talk a little bit more about how we might get to understand our communities a little bit better than what we did, based on the work that Tony had done.
Tony Vinson's going to talk to this class on Wednesday next week.
So,
follow up directly as soon as someone mentions that.
I don't think Tony knew what he was letting himself in for. He came down for a cup of coffee, and I think he was there for about 20% of his life for the next 2 or 3 years as we worked through where we were going. What we came up with is a document there, and you can find it on our website, on Mildura's website, which is www.mildura.vic.gov.au. And that provided us with a very good way to move forward. And I'll come into that in a little bit more detail, but I thought I'd just start by reading a small bit from the introductory foreword prepared by Tony, mainly because it paints Mildura in a good light, and that's something that's always good to have out there in front. But he states, "It is not uncommon for local authorities to aspire to build strong, healthy communities. There are 3 things that distinguish Mildura Rural City Council's ambitions in this regard, and which provide grounds for confidence that will be especially successful in its endeavours. They are: 1, the integration of community development planning with a range of local government functions, rather than positioning community concerns as an abstract pursuit of the margins of real local government business." I might just pause there. I think that this was written back in 2008. I think local government is moving forward in relation to the integration of community planning into all of its work, and we're having conversation about this over lunch. And Monica was there, and also David Farmer, who's the CEO of Wollongong. And we're just having a bit of a chat with the other people at the table, and we all agreed it's really not the structure of the organisation that brings about this ability to want to work with the community, to plan for its future, to engage with the community. It is attitudinal. And unless the attitude is right, then nothing's going to follow from there. So it's really a matter of the attitude of the organisation, first off, in relation to wanting to work with its community, and then, more importantly, understanding how it might go about getting the most from that engagement for its community. I'll come back to a little bit about that later on. But I just wanted to make that point there, that the structures are part of it, but it really is an attitudinal thing on behalf of the organisation. I go back to Tony. The creation of planning bodies that bring together community stakeholders and local government to identify regional strengths and deficiencies and to plan remedial action where needed, and using systematically gathered data to guide the choice of community priorities and community strengthening activities, and to monitor progress in achieving community objectives. And it was with the last one of those, that gathering community data, that we started and moved forward from there. We were able to entice Tony to do some work for us, and he used some of his colleagues from the University of New South Wales to compile a series of 56 indicators looking at our community. They were compiled by postcode, and they broke down into, in the first iteration, 8 communities across our municipality. In the second iteration, we actually defined those down into 9. The indicators covered a range of areas, and I'll just read them. There are demographic indicators in there, so as we understand the composition of our community. Economic indicators, so as we can see what the drivers are behind the economy of the community. Community engagement indicators as to how we actually engage with our community. Community safety, and how safe people are in the community. Education, environment, health and social distress, where we looked at what the earnings were, what the rent was, what a proportion of or percentage of disposable income was going in rent and everything along those lines, so we could actually try to better understand what that social distress issue was within the community. So we had 56 clear indicators of our community across the whole of the municipality. So we were then able to analyse that and say, righto, when you look at this, where should our priorities be in working with those communities, working with those agencies which deliver services to those communities to overcome some of the poorer performing indicators. And from that, we actually developed what we've termed in Mildura a community engagement framework, and that was how we were going to drive progress from that basis of indicators. The community engagement framework became a 3-tiered structure, for want of a better word, albeit a very informal grouping, and that 3 tiers comprised what we termed a governance group, which was at that strategic level, operational forums, which was the next level down, and that was really the service providers, and then we had at the tactical level those groups of people, those parts of the organisation responsible for delivering services. And it wasn't until we started getting those groups together it became very obvious that there was a lot of work being done across our community, well intent but duplicated. Resources perhaps going to areas which may have been treating a symptom rather than a root cause. And so the long-term goal was that we could better understand how the community was being serviced, how that social cohesion and the well-being was being developed to better allocate those resources, get better integration of how all of that was going to occur to get a better outcome in the longer term. That governance group comprised 13 representatives. 7 of those were appointed, and it was at the chair, CEO level of the major organisations in the community. And that was the council, the police, the hospital, what we have down there, the Catchment Management Authority, which is really the environmental managers, for want of a better word, the Economic Development Board, and a couple of others which I can't remember off the top of my head. So they were appointed at that first level. The operational forums then had the role to choose another 6 representatives on that, so it was not only the strategic leaders of those organisations, but we're actually bringing operational staff in as well to bring that balance in relation to the discussions and planning around the various indicators that we wanted to pick up as priorities to move forward. The operational forums had their own discussions and looked at where they wanted to go, and they engaged those tactical groups to make sure that that balance was there as well, so as we're getting a full picture of what was actually being done across our community to assist those people who may be suffering disadvantage. What we're able to do from that was say, righto, when you look at across the whole of the municipality, there are 5 areas where we need to take on as priority issues, and we formed operational working groups around those. Each of those operational working groups had specific responsibility for driving discussion, research, and then coming back with proposals in relation to how we may well raise the level of community wellbeing in each of those indicator areas. The 5 indicator areas were, just off the top of, well, not off the top of my head, across the organisation we had a higher proportion than across the state and regional Victoria of psychiatric hospital admissions, incomplete education and training, issues of child maltreatment, and that was a very interesting one. You can imagine when you go to the Department of Human Services and say, we want data on child maltreatment, they're very reluctant to give that information over. So what this framework enabled us to actually do was show to the state government that we had a process in place, a strategic process in place where we were trying to build a better community, work with our community to build that better community, and with various confidentiality arrangements in place, they were willing to share that information with us. So not only did the framework allow us to work within, it also gave us that mechanism to work across local or work across state government. We had a disproportionate number of childhood accidents, and the research showed that a lot of that was to do with the agricultural economy and things along those lines. And the last one was just, and I think that's probably consistent to most communities, but our indicators showed that community safety was a fairly significant issue in our community. So they became 5 priority projects where the working groups were able to go away, engage with the service deliverers, engage with the recipients of those services, and talk about what the root causes were, not the symptoms, what the root causes were, get a better understanding of what was driving each of those indicators, and then come back with programs to put in place to try and improve the outcomes. Now, this, as I said, is long-term stuff. It's strategic. Mildura has now done a second social indicators report. They did the first one in 2006. This is 2008. You can appreciate that there's not a lot of change in those, very little in fact. This was more about refining the indicators before we got too far down the road. But it's really saying we'll go back every 5 years and we will do this again just to get a better understanding of where our communities are moving. So that was where we are at. I've got to say that I left Mildura in June, and 2 of those areas were making very good headway. 3 were languishing with the scope of the task. But I guess the good thing is at least it was out in the open, everyone was talking about it and looking to move forward with it. The other part, just moving aside now, the other thing that came out of that report was that one of our communities, compared to all of our other communities, was suffering far greater social disadvantage, which we hadn't realised. We just thought all communities were the same. I think that's the other learning that comes out of this, that 14 communities in Mildura, all 14 communities are different. All 14 communities have their own view of where they want to go and what they want. And the things that may have been done in the past about one fit fits all no longer does. And Monica's proven that with her talk up there about working with the various communities to get outcomes for those specific communities. And so that's basically where this document led us with that community. We were able to engage the state government by giving them the data to say, hang on, here is real data which says we have a significantly disadvantaged community. We want you to work with us to build that community. With that, they became on board as partners. We jointly funded a project officer for 2 years. That project officer worked intimately with that community, went out and engaged broadly, also worked very closely with the organisation to make the whole organisation aware of the issues in that particular community, and to get the whole organisation more focused on engagement when not only dealing with that community but broader community. So we're learning lessons out of working with that community which were transferable to the other communities. Over that 2-year period, that community developed a community plan which created its own visioning. They did their own visioning exercise, created their own vision, and then they worked out their own priorities. And as a result of that, they were able to put forward their plan to council, not council saying, there is your plan. That community was able to come back to council and say, there is our plan. The representatives of the community came and presented it to the councillors. This is our plan, this is our vision for the future, this is the priorities, and this is how we've put our advisory or our group together to make sure that this plan is driven forward. And the change in that community over a 2-year period was significant, and that's anecdotal. We're still yet to get the strong data to support that. But going back into the community progressively over that period of time, the community was far more buoyant. It was more connected. The groups were talking to one another. They'd actually got representatives of all of the groups and created their own overriding body to develop the plan and everything along those lines. So that's the other thing that we've been able to do, is actually identify which communities really we did need to work on as priorities. When I left, we then had 6 plans. Each of those plans had been presented to the council, and council had noted them. Again, we had a conversation over lunch there as to whether it should be a joint plan where the community and the council own it. We elected that it would be a community plan and we would facilitate the development of that plan. And I guess there are pros and cons of both of those. Nonetheless, as I said, we've got 6 of those. What we've been able to do also is create some money on the side. We were putting $250,000 in there from when we started this, and there's about $1 million floating around there now, where those communities can then put application in for that fund. It can't be used for anything else but to fund those community plans. And if it's a priority, requires further work, they can get a phase 1 grant which allows them to undertake feasibility studies. Or it might well be that they need to advance a facility forward and they can get some funding to assist them, and we will work with them to bring that to fruition. So all in all, I think it's been a very successful outcome. The community certainly has embraced it. But again, I go back to the fact that if we didn't understand our community in the first place, we wouldn't have been able to clearly identify where we needed to work. And by having that data and an engagement framework in place, we're able to have conversations with our community which we haven't had in the past. And engagement's not about going and telling the community what you're going to do. It's about going and working with the community, understanding what they would like for their community, and then facilitating how you bring that to fruition. Not easy, but again, I think if a local government's going to be relevant going forward, then that is where it's going to need to work. Perhaps again, to conclude, much the same as Monica, understandings that I've gained. The first one is do all you can to understand your community and make sure you look below the surface. You can walk into the community and it may appear to be functioning reasonably well. You really need to have a look below the surface and clearly understand the community and how it's travelling. Then once you've had that close look, understand the issues and try and find the root cause or those big levers for change. If you're going to change, you really need to get down deep and change something fundamental to have that change. You know, for instance, the low transfer from secondary to tertiary is not going to change overnight. It's something that we would have to work with many partners, or Mildura will work with many partners with going forward. Certainly got money from the Department of Education to research that further through the local learning and employment network. But again, it's long-term change, as opposed to some of that community planning stuff you do across the community. Brings on to the third one, understand that change will not happen overnight. It is bloody hard work, I've got to tell you. And as you go into the community, you have to work through issues, whether they be personality-based issues, whether they be power-based issues, whether they be jealousy issues. There's all sorts of issues in the community that will try to take this off rail as people try to move it in the direction they want to go rather than the whole community. So it is hard work, and you just have to continue working. It requires commitment by both the community, the staff, and most importantly, it requires commitment by the elected members. And I go back that if we don't have that at the beginning, it's very difficult then to get an outcome which works in favour of the community. Engage your community, don't pay lip service or go through the motions. They will see what you're going to, they will know what you're up to, and that will put you back further than you started. And then the last one, as I said, if you're going to go out and develop these community plans, then most of all you must have follow through on your commitments, and you must create the resources to enable you to follow through on those commitments. Thank you very much. That's me done, and we'll see where we go from there. So I might just, before I do conclude, just say that we've now taken, or Mildura has now taken their social indicators to where they've actually commissioned another set of data there, which is community wellbeing indicators. And they've run the first one. The next one will be by postcode. This is just generally across the community and flew out of or followed out of one the state government did, but at a higher level. And it's also on the web.
Thanks,
Stephen.
So, Bateman's Bay. Karen, do you have any questions?
Hi, Lydia. We have a question here from you.
I'm glad you started. My question for Monica is, can you say something more about how you reconcile the common good model with the business model?
I applaud the briefness and the succinctness of the question. That's excellent.
That's a terrific question. So that was, how do you reconcile the common good model with the business model? I have to say that in developing Sustainable Sydney 2030, some of our greatest supporters were actually from the business community. And that's because I think people from the business community have understood that if the city, the place that they do business in, doesn't work well, then business can't work well. Businesses need people to work for them. And if they can't get people to work for them and the transport doesn't work or they can't live near where they work, they can't get staff. Businesses in a CBD, and obviously I've got a particular perspective because we look after a CBD, when their staff want an active civic life. If they bring staff from other parts of the world or even other parts of Australia, their staff say to them, well, if we're going to live in Sydney, we want to know there's great schools for our kids, that their city is safe, that there's a cultural life, that there is a civic life. You know, business knows that all of those aspects of civic life and of a solid democracy actually is good for business. It is very hard to invest in a society that has an unstable governance structure. It is very risky. People will invest in places where business is good. And for example, when the riots happen in Redfern and when the riots happen in Cronulla, that has a business impact. People started to say, should we really build our business in a city where there are riots? There was a major event coming to Sydney, I can't remember, prior to the Cronulla riots, and the event organisers, and let's face it, we make a lot of money. You know, we generate a lot of income as a nation from events, cities do, contacted the city to say, is it a safe city? Do we still run with our event? So stability, social cohesion, housing, transport, city infrastructure are all business issues. They require that. So I think the business community has been really engaged in that, and also the thinking end of the business community understands about climate change. The thinking end of the business community knows that we do not have energy security and we do not have water security. They know that they are real, and food security. They know they are real things. The thinking end of business is forecasting and looking at what's going to happen with their businesses into the future, and they know those things are real, and they will partner with and support anyone, and in this case the city government, who is seriously asking questions about that. So that's part of the answer, and that is that there is a reason for the business community to get involved. The other part of the answer is a bit more complicated, and that is the bit about the fact that on the one hand, you can say all of that, but we all know that in recent years, probably government and society has given over too much freedom. Is that the right way to put it? There has been, I think, in my mind, a bit of an erosion of regulation and the environment within which business operates. And communities do have to take that back to some extent. And I use the two examples of Copenhagen and the global financial crisis, where we all saw it all started to unravel, and we all saw what happens if you just say, oh, the market and business can take care of this. It can't. Government has to have a role in that, and that means community has to have a role in that. But to have a role in it and to be active participants, you have to understand it, and understanding it is hard because the whole system has been made so complex that it's really hard to understand. We've all struggled with understanding the financial system, and if there's one thing I kept meaning to put in my paper but didn't quite find the place, I really, really say to people, please start to understand the electricity system and the water system. We have got to understand that, because the way it is structured is problematic as far as I'm concerned, and communities have got to be involved in understanding how energy and water is provided, because without it, well, we're finished. Thank you.
Right. So, Karen, I'm wondering, are there any more questions from Bateman's Bay? You get a bonus question because the question just asked was so succinct and to the point that you can now get a bonus question. I thought it was funny too, although this audience is.
This is for my but this is not news though.
Excellent.
I think that she would go, I think this should be the problem she's having to bring about change, which will hinder it by levels of government above the citizen. Is that correct, Monica?
You're saying...
If so, what were, and how did you deal with it?
So are you asking me, was I saying that we're having difficulties with the engagement on the levels above? And what are we doing about it?
Yes.
That's your question? Okay. So,
What were they?
okay. Well, the problems are, I think the main problem is that it is very hard for us as citizens and communities and people working at the level to see alignment between national objectives and local action, okay? So the first thing is, unless there's a really clear narrative, and I go back to stories, but one of the major roles of leaders is to tell the story, isn't it? To explain how it's all going to work, so that then you can say, yeah, I can see that. I can understand how you're thinking we're going to solve this problem, or how you're thinking we're going to do this. So that's what leaders need to do. Now, and then we need to see all of those layers come together. So I'll give you a couple of examples, because that would be the best way to do it. I'll give you an example about affordable housing, and I'll give you an example about emissions. The federal government came in and said, we agree with you all. There's not enough housing and there's not enough affordable housing, right? We all know that that's an issue. And so they reissued some policies and therefore funding. But what they did was say, okay, here's a scheme. In this particular case, it's called the NRAS scheme, the National Affordable Rental Housing Scheme. Here it is, and here's the money, and here's the guidelines. And cities looked at it, like us, and we did a submission, and we said, that's terrific, except it can't work in the city, because the cost of land and the cost of remediation is higher than your formula allows, therefore no one will take it up. And we were right. No one has taken it up. So what happened was that they issued a policy, but they thought they could apply it universally because they're centralised. We want housing. Here it is, go do it. And we said, yes, good start. But now talk to local, because we will explain to you where we need the housing and what the issues are around that particular housing. So we need alignment. We need to agree as a nation we need housing, let's assume we have, and then we have to look at how do you use the money and the resources and the thinking at a local level? How do you implement the housing? Because we're the ones who are going to live with it, right? So, and also at a local level, we say, well, wait a minute, don't just do that thing you used to do before, where you'd build all the housing for people who had some high needs and put them all together with no services and then say, oh, well, we provided the housing, and say, yes, but you've left us with all these social and community problems, right? Because housing, it's never just one thing. It's how housing works in place. But if you don't talk to us, you won't know about the place, as Phil has pointed out. So it's not enough. You cannot just do these things in silos. Well, emissions is the same thing, right? The federal government's working out how it's going to put into place a scheme for reducing emissions. But the cities every day are saying, we've got so many things we can do in the way we build the city and the way we work with communities about the way they live in the city that we could be reducing emissions now if you would just help, if you would just get out of our way, right? So we offered to the federal government, and can I say, one of the things at the end of my paper was about that advocacy. We are not being passive here. We've written, you know, kind of policy papers for the federal government. We're taking it up to national and international forums. We're taking this up, and all over the world people are talking about this. Every city I go to and every city I meet with is saying exactly the same thing. There are a lot of solutions around climate change and living within our environment that are in the hands of local people and local governments. We know lots of things about how we could do different things differently that we could negotiate, but you have to listen to us. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that if you don't think that your way you operate, when your policy hits the ground at the local, it has to be able to adapt to the local. If you don't talk to the local, if you don't listen to the local, then you will never get there. And we're seeing examples of it. So that's my examples. I hope that answers your question. Phil, do you want to... No?
Clearly, the third thing is, after hiring Tony Vinson, getting your street theatre group going, getting the script organising, you work out a way to tell people to get out of your way nicely, especially the federal government. Okay, so Bega's had their bonus question. I would like to compliment people from Bega. 2 succinct questions in succession. Terrific. Everyone in Bega will get a HD. There's no one at Shoalhaven. What? Bateman's Bay, just testing, I knew that. I was seeing if you're on your toes. Channel 4 will be here in a minute. I want everyone to be on their toes. I want lots of head nodding, you know, lots of take on Monica's hand animation stuff, you know. Just, okay, moving right along. So are there questions from the Wollongong audience, although the Shoalhaven audience is there, but they can't see us and might not be able to hear us, and the same for Mossvale. So is there anyone from here? Yes, so Julie.
Monica, I'd like to ask you, what did you mean by all that social capital?
Another succinct question by Julie Head. She's clearly learning.
I've got 2 other questions as well.
I might go with the first one first. Don't push your luck, Julie. The first one is, Julie's question to Monica was, what did Monica mean by building up social capital? And I think we might try and direct some questions to Phil, because at the moment...
He's doing lots of social capital too.
Are you? Because the score is at the moment Monica 3, Phil 0.
Without going into, obviously there's been lots of work all around the world about what this thing social capital is, right? And I think what we mean is it's like social capacity, social strength, right? And there's lots of different ways of understanding what that might mean and what reflects it. And Phil actually talked about some of those things. You've got to understand what makes up your community and what are the attributes that makes it strong, right? Now, the first thing is there are lots of outward signs of social capital, right? So signs of social capital in the kind of, kind of literature, and I'm not going to quote anyone, because it's been a long time since I've read it, but generally, communities where there's a lot of participation, often reflected by lots of not-for-profit organisations, often have social capital. Communities where people do this, they come together, to listen, to share, to talk, to question, to explore ideas are places that are rich in social capital. Places where people can congregate without there being huge issues, outward reflections of social capital. The important thing about social capital and the studies that I know a little bit about is that the more of that you've got, the more people have both education and ways of meeting together, learning together, doing things together, whether it's running a sporting group or running your local childcare centre or participating in your local government. The more of that there is, the more people understand the processes of governance. And the more you have of that, the less you have the chance of corruption and interference. So what it is people have the skills to know how to work things out or how to progress things in a transparent way through the system, right? If you don't have that, if it's every man for himself, every woman for themselves, what you have is, I don't care what's happened to my neighbour, I'm just going straight to my counsellor and I'm just going to nag them until I get what I want. And if they don't have, there's not a whole lot of community stuff holding them to account, then they'll just go, oh yeah, I'll just work it out, don't you worry, leave it to me. Okay? And then things break down because you can't see the process. Everyone doesn't have equal access and opportunity to the process. So everything we do and every way we operate is about understanding what constitutes a healthy community and keeping it that way, and where there is not that community health, investing in it. And you invest in it either by providing the opportunity to participate, sometimes it's by providing the funds so the group can get up and get going, all of those sorts of things. Because we know if we don't have it, we can't do good governance. You know, there's no point achieving what we're trying to achieve if everyone's not on board. The means do not justify the end. The means and the end go together. So that's what I mean. In my paper, I talked about some of those Australian indicators. And the reason I raised those is there is a kind of another body of work that I think a lot of us are looking at now, which is developed by Richard Wilkinson in the UK. And it's the work about relative equality. And that's very interesting work. And that's work about the fact that it doesn't matter how rich or poor your nation is. It's the difference between rich and poor in your community that's what impacts. The smaller the gap, the less the problems. Because if you are poor and you can see your neighbour is rich and not sharing, that makes you cross, right? Let's put it really simply. So really, what it's indicating is close the gap. Invest in closing the gap. Maybe we pay a little bit more tax, but our neighbour's okay. Isn't it better that our neighbour is okay than we have to live in a walled city? I think I would rather pay a little and know that my neighbour has the health care, the childcare, the community care that they need and that I'm helping to pay for it, than have to live in a walled city because I think they're going to break into my house. So that relative equality stuff is what we're starting to look at now at the city in terms of how we might frame our social capacity building going forward. So therefore we understand what we want to intervene in. If we think that is a contributor, gap between rich and poor is a contributor, what are we going to do to close the gap? And clearly that's work with our disenfranchised communities around economic development. Yep. Yes?
I don't want to get left out, I guess, more than anything else. I just want to build on that example of that community I spoke about, and I called it social cohesion. It's building social capital, and to me it really is getting everybody in the community involved in where the community is going, and from that social capital will be created. It's about people in the community, much the same as the neighbours, people in the community wanting to go down the street and talk to one another and having that the sense of place, that sense of purpose within their own community. And to me, that's what social capital is. It's that feeling of place, that sense of purpose that you're having a say in where your community is going. If you've got that engagement, then your social capital is building.
Okay. Score is 3-1 now. Not that I'm keeping score. Okay, so Julie, we'll get back to you, but there might be some other questions. So, yes.
Could I ask Phil a question?
Phil.
You said that part of making progress after you got the Mildura social indicators was the integration of the community development workers in the council with a range of local
fascinating to hear how you did that and what happened.
Yeah, look, it's hard work, and I know in Mildura it's not there yet, and I can assure you in Shepparton it's not there yet either. It's a matter of, much the same as you want to build that sense of purpose in the community, you need to build in your own organisation where everybody recognises they're to work for the community and they need to engage with the community. One way we are looking at doing it in Shepparton, I did in Mildura, is I actually have one of my level 2s head up a cross-functional group which is looking at how we plan with our community, and therefore it's getting representatives from each of the parts of the organisation around the table. They're talking about activities they've got going on and how they can better integrate that community engagement, those conversations with the community, so as when something is formulated, it's been through that engagement process. And I think that's the way you've got to go, that it will hopefully over time happen as a matter of course, but you have to put the processes in place to change the understanding, change the behaviours in the organisation, and that's driven a lot by the values of the organisation itself.
Sandra.
My question is to Phil, and it's in regard to your community engagement plan. How are you doing your formal evaluation? So you know it's working for us, it feels good with the community, but how are you formally evaluating it?
The evaluation comes as we redo those 56 indicators, and that will tell us where we are moving as an organisation and as a community. And as I said, that will happen every 5 years to go from there. The other side of the evaluation obviously comes in relation, and particularly in that wellbeing survey, that the community is actually telling us how they feel about their community, how they feel about engagement and everything along those lines. So part of it's around the perception measures of the community and how they feel, and that's done on a biannual basis. And the other part is in the change in those social indicators over time to talk about whether or not we're reaching those levers to change and go forward from there.
Alrighty, so Dave.
Actually, what percentage of the population actually actively involved in this decision making and participation? For example, in Wollongong, 200,000, maybe more than 100,000.
It depends on what we're doing, okay? So, and it depends on what actively involved. Look, let's say what we mean by active. There are small groups of people who are active, right? Building the community garden, not just asking for it. Out there handing out pamphlets about how to be a good cyclist. You know, applying for grants to do projects in the community action plan. So they would number in the hundreds, and one of the things that we're trying to do with them is involve them now in being part of the report back. So that when we do report backs, which is really important because that's about keeping the circle going, right, and closing the loop, is getting them now, and we've started to do that at community meetings, say, okay, well, the council's going to tell you about this project, and this is what we did and how it went, and then we get up community group, yes, and we did this project, which was also something we wanted to do in the community, and this is how we went. So that it's just partners, side by side, right, we're just all in it together. So that's the active. Then there's active, like when the question about the business community. I mean, the business community is now signing up for things like better building partnerships. There are dozens of businesses who have signed up for City Switch, which is our building tenancy retrofit program. So literally businesses, well, now all over Australia, because we've rolled that program out all over Australia through the capital cities. So they're active. They're refitting their buildings to make it more sustainable. Then there's active in terms of, you know, parent groups at community centres, parent groups at childcare centres, all of that kind of stuff. The broader plan is they're active in so much as they come along, they participate, they feed back to us, you know, they fill in the surveys, they come to the talks, all of those kinds of things to tell us how we're going and to feed back to us what they think ought to happen next. So there's degrees of it. That's when we're talking about broader city visioning type stuff. When we come to building a park or a library or something, or doing something, then the local stakeholders are hugely active. Like, we have hundreds of people at meetings. Like, at the moment, we're doing a land use plan for a place called Harold Park, which is in the inner city, you know, the old... And so, I mean, literally, there are hundreds of people coming to regular meetings to look at, you know, what do we know about this land? What do we think ought to happen there? What do we think is not negotiable? What we think is negotiable? What are the land use issues? What are the stormwater issues? What are the, you know, open space issues? All that kind of stuff. They're very active at a particular point in time when we're doing something that's in their neighbourhood. Yeah. Thanks.
Alrighty. Yes.
We'll have to super a meeting now if that's possible.
That's that, Patrick. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, Monica. I'm interested in the sustainable city energy and emission reduction. Do you have short-term goals and how are you going to achieve them?
I'm going to have to be very careful because I could talk for hours about that. So our short-term goal is 20% reduction by 2012 for the organisation, and we'll get there because we've put, again, you know, we've got a target, so we put money towards it. We're already carbon neutral because we buy green energy, we offset everything, but that's not enough. We're now retrofitting our entire portfolio, and we're also putting in a complete integrated cycle waste system and doing everything that's within our power to achieve our organisational target. Then we have 70% as well organisationally, and we're fairly confident we can get there because we've agreed and decided just to invest in it. You know, we're going to put our resources there because that's what people said they wanted. For the city, it is a much longer conversation that we can't really have here. We have what we have, and we're the first ones in Australia to have done it. It's based very much on the work that London pioneered and other capital cities are doing. We have what is an emissions reduction plan. It shows every area where we have to reduce emissions and how we're going to do it. So how much we can get from the replacement of lighting with more energy efficient or LED lighting. Everything we can do by with growth so there's lighting, extra putting in renewable, those kinds of things. So there's this what we call a waterfall, which shows every single action we would need to take in order to get those emissions reductions. The biggest part of it, and I won't go into it, is to get decentralised energy into the city and renewable energy into the city. So what we're doing at the moment is we are now doing the master planning for that, and that is also probably amongst the first cities in the world to have done it. And just to say it very quickly, currently we have centralised energy because it happens, you know, in the Hunter Valley and other places where it's produced and then it's sent to the city. What we're looking at is decentralised systems where the electricity is actually created within the city so that the heat that is normally lost from the power stations is actually captured and used for heating or converted to cooling. And we can get about 50–60% more efficiency doing it that way. Now, obviously there's a lot more to it than I can say here today. But it is a technology that, you know, I've just gone to see in Copenhagen. Sweden's done lots of it. Korea's doing it. It's not new, right? The challenge is, and this comes back to the question of working with the 3 levels of government. It can be done. The technology exists, and for decentralised energy, it is about the same price as the current way we get energy. Renewable energy, because our plan depends on 30% renewable as well, is not the same price. Because there is no carbon tax. Because you still don't pay for the cost of emissions, right? So the thing is, this is why federal policy has got to get itself organised. Until we have clarity about the cost of carbon, there is no way, the other options are not financially viable. Now, our big focus at the city is, because actually pulling this off is very ambitious. Even though we know it can be done and we've seen it. The main reason we're doing the studies to do it, but the other reason we're doing the studies and the way we're doing it with city talks and everybody can come along and listen and learn is that the community needs to understand that. The community needs to understand where your power comes from, how it is, why it costs what it does, why that is not true, It is not a true reflection of its cost, what the choices are, and what the different models providing energy, and I would assume water is the same, but I don't know as much about water, will be. This is a community thing. This is our issue. But I have spent a year trying to understand how this works, and I'm still struggling with it. So I don't know how anyone with a couple of articles here and there can understand what's going on. So we've got, our program is clean up our own backyard. We are carbon neutral. We will do everything in our power to make sure we get our emissions target, we meet our emissions targets as an organisation. We will do it, and then do everything we can that is within our reach to understand what the choices are, share those with our community so we're informed, and advocate for the change required to enable us, and that's what I mean about getting out of the way, enable us to do the right thing. How can we say as a nation, sign up for Kyoto targets and then have no plan? Well, we've got a plan and we're going to do what we can. Thanks.
Okay.
This is for Bill. I just have a quick question about, you were talking at one point about the process of listening and getting consent to the community. And I'd like some advice on a very real problem, practical problem for some people in groups that put up such a self-defensiveness and self-righteousness that we actually can't even get the word to be listened to. Now, I'm talking about like some church groups, women groups, some of the political groups, and they just get real defensive. Oh, that's not us. We're not that. They actually don't even listen to what you defensiveness is about. How do you correct that defensiveness for equality area? It's so common in so many groups.
It's a difficult issue. I think the only way you can do that is by having various tools at your disposal to encourage people to have free conversation, and that might well be where you impose certain rules in relation to how much they can say or how much they can't. The fact that if it's defensive or negative, it goes over that side as opposed to the positives and capture the positive thoughts. So it's in the way you go about actually conducting your engagement sessions from my point of view. So as you create an environment which people are willing to participate in. I don't have those skills. That's why we engage or have on our staff people that have those skills. But if you're going to run that's why I say, if you're going to run an engagement session, it's not just turning up on the day and say, hey, what do you think about this? It's actually sitting down and doing your engagement strategy so you understand the target audience that you're engaging, what some of the barriers might be that come out of that, and then have a range of strategies and a range of forums and activities. And it might well be that there's surveying and other tools that you will use where you'll get that initial gathering of data and everything along those lines. So it's actually thinking about and planning your engagement activities rather than just rocking up on the day for a conversation. And that's the only way you will overcome them. If you don't think about it and try to pre-plan for it, then you'll always have those sorts of situations arising.
All right, so we've got time for a few more questions. Yes?
My question is to Phil. Phil, with your military background,
Thank you.
I'm sure if you were going up to a war zone in the past, you would have wanted a pretty good team behind you. Well, as Wollongong, a city, a community, inclusive, looking to elect a new council, what particular type of person would you be looking to choose as your councillors, your team, to represent the community as a community being inclusive of everyone?
That's a very difficult question, particularly the CEO of Wollongong sitting right behind you. Talking about later.
We've got 10 minutes.
Mine is very simple. The community will elect the people that they believe are going to do the right job. I think from my point of view, at the end of the day, there will be an election. I have 7 councillors. I will have 7 councillors to work with. It's my role to try and give them sufficient information to enable them to do their job. In conjunction with the Mayor, it's up to me and the Mayor then to start building that team and forming a team. Part of that, and it sounds like doctrinal rhetoric, but part of that is getting the council there to develop a shared vision for their term of council and then move forward from there. You know, if you're looking at what is the person, I'd be looking for a person that's got the community interests at heart, first and foremost, and then move forward from there.
An ideal segue to Dave, as a former councillor of Wollongong City Council. Go, Trevor, sorry, just testing.
Yeah. Bringing together the social benefit and coming together as a community and talking about the environment and sustainability have called me on what the New Year's Eve, right throughout the world, all the factory and fireworks that went up. And if that's not emissions, I don't know what a city block plan will affect the New Year's Eve.
Okay. So this is an interesting one. Of course, we do offset everything, but the point is New Year's Eve was broadcast to over 2.6 million people. It generates about $150 million each year for the economy, and it employs all local Australian artists. So, you know, people say that, but can I say, I also think community celebration is a really important thing. I think at the end of the year to come together peacefully and to celebrate the end of the year and to renew our commitments going forward is an important social, spiritual activity. Now, anything we do is going to have an impact. There is no impact-free anything. You just have to look at how you do to deal with it. So I just don't see, I mean, there has not been a groundswell of communities saying we don't want New Year's Eve, right? So generally people want it. The economic benefit is huge. The branding benefit is humongous. All over the world, Sydney is seen, and therefore Australia is seen as an exciting and wonderful place to visit. And we all live and benefit off what is generated from those kinds of things. The tourism, the visitors, people wanting to do business with Australia, people thinking that Australians are, people who know how to have fun and how to celebrate and do it peacefully. So there has not been there certainly have not been enough people saying that we should not do that at the moment for the city to decide not to do that.
Alrighty. Bill.
Jeffrey Robertson was here recently and gave us a good going over about human rights. And it occurred to me that your state government now has human rights legislation. And I wonder if you've got any comment about the relations between
them. Certainly we're still coming to grips with them. When we put issues to council, we certainly do an impact statement, very brief mind you, in relation to the charter. But I've got to say it's very new times for us at this stage, and we're not fully across it. Other than to say that we do, as I said, a very short, sharp impact statement to see if we believe there's any breach.
Alrighty, so we've got time for about 3 or 4 more questions. Yes, Ian.
The framework you talk about community engagement is not much different to what we're involved with manufacturing and looking at manufacturing. At the end of the day, you talk about products, you talk about profit. Profit is identified as social capital. What's the product? It may be different in this community.
Look, the product's a very difficult one for me to define. I don't know if they're going to be different or not, but I would have thought the product we're selling is a more inclusive lifestyle, a more enjoyable lifestyle is the outcome that we're looking for, and I guess that's the product, that the community does enjoy being a part of that community and all that that community may have to offer.
And I agree totally with that, and I think the other products are jobs, because if people have jobs and if the economy is strong, I mean, probably the most important thing that people need is shelter and jobs, because if they've got shelter and if they've got their own job, then they can be, autonomous in their own lives. So everything we do has got to contribute to that stability. All that other stuff that I talked about in terms of the amenity of a city contributing to it being a good place to do business is only so that there are jobs. But you're absolutely right. It is the methods are really, really the same. But you do have to be really clear about what it is that your product and your outcome is. And you have to be clear about the unintended outcomes of the things that you do. And that's something, I guess, that I was trying to talk about, that if you don't say to yourselves, why are we doing this, apart from the obvious things at the end, the way you do it has also got to give you those intended outcomes. And those intended outcomes are people who are informed and able to be autonomous and be active, solid citizens, exercise their citizenship.
I'll just go one further, and I take that business analogy, and I think you're absolutely right. There is nothing new about what we're doing, and business is a perfect example of business has always had meaningful discussions with its customers and has to understand very early on what their customers are after. If they don't satisfy it, they're not in business. Now, I don't particularly like the word customer, as ratepayers and residents is more politically acceptable, but in the analogy, that's what we're doing now. What we're doing is what business has been doing for a long time, and better understanding what our customers want by way of product and price.
Except...
Yep. Yep. Here we go.
No, it's good. I think which is all true, except coming back to the point of this summer school, right? The reason we cannot use the word customer, the reason we cannot think about it that way, because it is not about me, right? It's about having the capacity to ask about me in the context of my society, me in the context of my community, right? It isn't just what I want. And that's what often happens with our community engagement, local government level. And I see it. The wealthier the community, the more it's about me.
In fact, you are talking to your employers. It's the opposite of what you're saying. He's talking to his customers. You're talking to your employers.
In a roundabout form, that's another one we could go on for a long time over.
Yeah.
I just think, like us, to be looking at what you said, the customers, the community, all that group of people, not individuals.
Yeah, but we don't want them to think of, you buy this, I pay for that water, so I'm entitled to have it just how I want it. Well, wait a minute, you do pay for that water, but that water has to be shared with everyone. So the way you use it has to be shared. So how are your need going to be accommodated within the broader need? And that's the next part of the conversation. It isn't just a one-on-one customer conversation. Don't run away.
So we might have time for two more questions. John, yeah? Yeah.
I want to ask a question on each of the campuses. Over the last month, how many on your campus?
If they please have the microphone on so we can hear them here at the other campus. We haven't been able to hear the last 3 or 4 questions. Either maybe you read some questions.
Today in this audience, we have Sandra McCarthy, the Mayor of Kiama, and we have the General Manager of Wollongong City Council. I will ask this question again on Wednesday when I give my presentation. In each of the campuses, Bega, Shoalhaven, Australia and Wollongong, how many local government servants and local government elected representatives have attended any of the sessions?
So Karen, how many people from local governments do you think have...
Well, actually, we had one Barone City councillor attend a fortnight ago, and then we've had regular attendance by Peter Carney, who's a former councillor. Neither of those people are here today, but we've had, relatively strong participation.
Okay, all right. What about Bega? Patrick, how many people from local government do you think have attended some of the seminars?
Well, I'm Emma Benjamin and I work in the Bega Council in Community Development. We haven't had any councillors come along, but I've been attending the whole talk.
I actually think Emma might have been the first person to enrol. So you can say that. Not only have Bega asked terrific questions today, short, sharp and to the point, but they've got the first person enrolled. We might have time for one more question from Wollongong, someone that mightn't have asked the question before. Yeah. And it has to be a question.
It's an interesting piece of technology.
When you were talking about the various groups and their outcomes in Mildura, you said that 2 were succeeding in their outcomes. Have you been able to analyse why?
No. When I say succeeding, it's more in relation to the advancement they've made in understanding the problem and some of the rearranging of the programs that they've put in place to better integrate some service delivery. But I think it's more the conversations they're having around the table and what they're actually reading in the data as opposed to what the others were. Having said that, I haven't been there since mid-May, so they could well have moved forward from there. So I'm speaking historically.